There are moments that arrive the way a held breath finally releases, not with a bang, but with a stillness so complete that everything before it seems like noise. I had one of those moments at my sister's wedding reception, standing at table 4 with a champagne glass in my hand, listening to her list 7 names that were not mine. My name is Vivienne Ashworth. I am 44 years old. And on the Saturday evening in April, when my younger sister Petra stood at the head of a room of 112 guests and delivered a toast that thanked her florist, her photographer, her college roommate, her mother-in-law, her husband's 2 brothers, her best friend since 7th grade, and her new husband's grandmother, and did not, in 7 minutes and 40 seconds of speaking, once say my name, I made a decision I had been preparing for 6 weeks. I set my glass on the table. I said one sentence. I walked out. This is the story of everything that sentence contained. Petra is 9 years younger than me. She came into our family the way a second child sometimes does, into a house that had already organized itself around the first, which meant she arrived into a space that was partly mine. My parents had been stretched thin by the time she was born. My father was managing a slow-motion career change, and my mother had gone back to part-time work, and a great deal of the domestic labor of our household fell, gradually, and without anyone naming it, onto me. I was 13 when Petra was born. I was the one who could warm a bottle. I was the one who knew the bedtime routine. By the time I was 16 and she was 3, I was the one neighbors saw walking her to the park on Saturday mornings while my parents managed the particular exhaustion that comes with financial instability. I did not resent this, not precisely. I understood the household needed things, and I was capable of providing them. What I did not understand at 16 was that capability so freely given eventually becomes expectation, and expectation eventually becomes invisibility. Petra grew up knowing I would handle things. Not because anyone told her this directly, but because it was demonstrated for her entire childhood. I handled the school pickup when my mother's hours changed. I handled the summer programs when my parents couldn't manage the logistics. I sat with Petra through 2 broken arms, 1 tonsillectomy, and a period in middle school when she was being bullied in a way that required careful, quiet, sustained attention over several months. I did all of this because I loved her. I want to be honest about that. It was not martyrdom. It was love. But love given without acknowledgement, over years, does something to the person giving it. It doesn't poison the love. It just makes the giver smaller, incrementally, in the accounting of the family, until the giver is so reliably present that they become part of the furniture. Not a person who chose to show up. Just a fixture that was always there. I should tell you about the 14 months before the wedding. Petra got engaged in February of the year before, to a man named Callum, who is decent and kind, and who looked at her the way people deserve to be looked at. I was glad for her. I said so. And then I rolled up my sleeves because that is what I had always done, and I began. I helped her find the venue, the Hargrove Estate, a converted farmhouse 40 minutes outside the city, which had a waiting list and required a deposit of $4,750 paid in a specific window. I was the one who drove out to see it on a Thursday in March, because Petra had a work conflict. I was the one who called the coordinator, a meticulous woman named Diane, every time there was a question about the catering minimum or the parking arrangement or the tent configuration. I hosted the rehearsal dinner at my house for 31 people. I made the centerpieces, 48 small cedar and eucalyptus arrangements that took me 3 evenings to assemble on my dining room table. I organized the bachelorette weekend in a rented lake house that slept 8, coordinated the dietary restrictions of 11 women, and drove 4 hours each way because Petra does not like highway driving at night. I was not keeping track because I expected repayment.
I want to be clear about that.
I was keeping track because, at some point in the months of preparation, I noticed that Petra had begun to move through the planning the way she had always moved through the logistics of our shared life, as a person to whom things happened smoothly without visible effort because someone else had absorbed the effort before it could reach her. I noticed it in small ways at first. A text that said, "Can you handle the florist deposit? I'll get you back," that was never gotten back. A phone call that assumed I would manage the coordination with Callum's family about the rehearsal timing, without asking whether I had capacity that week. A conversation about the seating chart in which she used the word "we" for decisions I had made entirely alone. The antagonist motivation I have come to understand is this. Petra did not omit my name from gratitude because she was cruel. She omitted it because, to her, my help was not a gift. It was weather. It was the ground beneath her feet.
You do not thank the ground.
You simply stand on it and look at the horizon. That is the wound. It is old. It did not start with the wedding. The inciting incident was not the toast itself. It was a conversation that happened 6 weeks before the wedding, in Petra's kitchen, on a Sunday afternoon in early March. I had driven over to drop off the finalized table assignments. I had spent the better part of that Saturday cross-referencing seating preferences, dietary flags, and the specific interpersonal tensions between Callum's Aunt Berenice and his college friend group, which I had been quietly managing since the save-the-dates went out. I had the chart in a craft folder. I had printed 2 copies. I set them on her kitchen island, and Petra glanced at the top sheet and said, "Perfect. You're so good at this stuff." There was nothing overtly unkind in that sentence. And yet I stood in her kitchen, which smelled of coffee and the lavender soap she always kept at the sink, and I felt something clarify in me with the quiet finality of a door being locked from the inside. You're so good at this stuff. Not, I don't know what I would have done without you. Not, this has been an enormous amount of work, and I know it. Just, you're good at this. The way you would compliment a service. I'm glad, I said.
And I meant it.
But I also, standing at that kitchen island with the craft folder on the tile and the lavender smell in the air, made a quiet decision. I would stay the course. I would do everything I had committed to doing, the rehearsal dinner, the centerpieces, the weekend, the coordination. I would not pull back. But I was also going to protect myself. Quietly. Preemptively. In the way that a person who has finally understood the pattern prepares for the next repetition of it. That afternoon I called my friend Odette, who is a paralegal and who had been listening to me describe this family dynamic for the better part of a decade. I told her what I was thinking. She was quiet for a moment on the phone, and then she said, "Do you want me to pull together some documentation?"
I said yes.
Odette was not a lawyer, but she knew the relevant ones. The following Tuesday, I sat in the office of a family attorney named Harlan Brooke, who specialized in civil matters involving family financial arrangements. I had brought with me a folder of my own craft folder, a different one, that contained 14 months of records, Venmo transfers, bank statements showing the florist deposit, receipts from the lake house rental, $1,847, the centerpiece materials, $312.40, the 2 tanks of gas for the 4-hour drives. The total came to $7,463.82 in direct, documented, out-of-pocket expenses. I had never been repaid. Harlan looked at the folder for a long time. Then he said, "What do you want to do with this?" I said, "I want a formal letter of documentation. Not a demand. Just documentation. And I want to know my options if I ever need to exercise them." He prepared the letter over the following 2 weeks. I did not tell Petra. I did not tell anyone except Odette. I put the letter in the cedar box on the top shelf of my home office closet, and I went back to making centerpieces. I want to say clearly, I did not go to that lawyer hoping to use what he prepared. I went because I needed to know that what I had given was real, that it had a number, that the number existed somewhere in writing, witnessed by someone, even if only ever witnessed by me. Some things need to be named before you can let go of them. The 6 weeks between that lawyer's office and the wedding were the strangest sustained stretch I can remember in recent years. I was fully present in the planning. I answered every text. I drove to the Hargrove estate on a Wednesday to confirm the tent configuration with Diane. I picked up the cedar and eucalyptus arrangements from my dining room table and transported them in 3 careful trips in my Toyota Camry, wrapped in butcher paper. I was there. And underneath that presence, something had shifted in a way I could feel, but not entirely name. It wasn't anger. Anger is hot. This was cool. This was the sensation of having made a decision that you know is right and have not yet been required to act on, a kind of suspended readiness that is almost peaceful. My co-worker at the architecture firm where I work, a woman named Sylvie, who is 10 years younger than me, and has the particular quality of asking exactly the right question at exactly the wrong moment, caught me on a Thursday afternoon staring at my computer screen with the document I was supposed to be reviewing untouched for 11 minutes. "You okay?" she said. "Yes," I said. "Just thinking." "About the wedding?" "About a lot of things adjacent to it." Sylvie sat down in the chair across from my desk, uninvited, which she was always doing, and which I had long since stopped minding. "You know what I notice about you and this wedding?" she said. "You talk about every detail. The centerpieces, the timeline, the tent. You never once say you're excited." I looked at her. "I'm not excited," I said, which is not the same thing, and we both knew it. She said, "You've been running this thing. You know that, right? Not helping. Running it." I did not answer. I picked up my pencil and looked back at my screen. But I thought about that sentence for the rest of the day and into the evening, and I thought about it while I was tying the final 12 cedar and eucalyptus centerpieces at 11:14 p.m. on the Thursday before the wedding, my dining room table covered in clippings, the smell of eucalyptus filling the apartment in that particular sharp way it does when you've been handling it for hours. The rehearsal dinner went smoothly. 31 people in my house, catered by a restaurant I had organized, the playlist managed by a speaker I had set up, the dietary restrictions managed without incident. Petra moved through it the way she always moved, graciously, happily, genuinely delighted, thanking everyone in the room. She thanked Callum's mother. She thanked her maid of honor, a woman named Bex. She thanked the restaurant. She thanked me by saying, and of course Vivienne for hosting, in the same breath and register as she thanked the catering staff. I smiled. I refilled the water pitchers. The night before the wedding, I sat on the edge of my bed at 10:52 p.m. with my phone in my hands and Odette's number on the screen, and I stayed there for a long time without pressing call. The cedar box was on the shelf in the next room. I could feel it from where I sat, not literally, but the way you feel the presence of something you've been carrying without putting it down. I had been carrying the contents of that box for 6 weeks, and tomorrow it would either mean something or it wouldn't. I thought, what if she says my name? What if the toast is full and generous, and I have spent 6 weeks preparing a document I never need? And then I thought, what if it isn't? I stayed with both possibilities in the quiet apartment, the lavender soap smell drifting from the bathroom, the city sounds coming up faintly from the street 4 floors below. I pressed call. Odette answered in 2 rings. I said, "I just wanted to hear a voice that knew the whole story." She said, "I know the whole story." I said, "Good." We stayed on the phone for 41 minutes. She did not tell me what to do. She did not tell me it would be fine. She just stayed on the line, which is the only thing that mattered. The morning of the wedding, I was at the Hargrove estate by 8:07 a.m. to oversee the centerpiece placement. Diane was already there, moving with the precision I had come to associate with her, checking tablecloths and adjusting the position of chairs. She saw me carrying the first box of arrangements and held the service entrance open without being asked. 14 months, she said, almost to herself. 14 months, I confirmed. We placed all 48 centerpieces in just under 2 hours. The room looked extraordinary. The cedar and eucalyptus caught the light through the farmhouse windows in a way I hadn't been able to imagine from the dining room table, and now could see all at once. And for a moment, I just stood in the middle of that room and let myself feel it. All the hours. All the Tuesday mornings answering Petra's texts before my own coffee was ready. All the quiet logistics of keeping someone else's dream on schedule. I was proud of it. That is the honest thing. I was proud of what I had made for her. Then I went to change into my dress. The ceremony was at 4 o'clock. I sat in the second row, next to my parents, and I watched my sister marry a man who genuinely loved her, and I cried the way you cry at weddings when the love is real, not because you're sad, but because the weight of things accumulates and finds the path of least resistance. My mother held my hand during the vows. The afternoon light through the farmhouse windows was gold and long. By the time the reception began, I had decided to let it be what it was going to be. I had the documentation. I had the decision already made. Whatever happened in the toast, I was ready. And being ready had made me strangely calm. I sat at table 4 with Callum's cousin Rosalind, who turned out to be a high school art teacher and who talked about ceramics with the evangelical enthusiasm of someone who had recently discovered their purpose. I liked her. We talked about glazing techniques for longer than was strictly appropriate for a wedding reception, and for a stretch of perhaps 40 minutes, I was simply a woman at a table at a beautiful wedding, talking about pottery. Then the toasts began. Callum's best man went first. Then Bex, the maid of honor, who gave a toast that was funny and warm and included a story about a road trip in college that made Petra cry the good kind of tears. Then Callum's father. Then Callum's grandmother, who was 81 and held the microphone with both hands and said 11 words that silenced the room. Then Petra stood up. She had clearly prepared. She had notes on her phone that she held at a slight angle, glancing down occasionally, and her voice was steady and deliberate. She thanked Callum's family first, warmly and specifically. She thanked the venue, naming Diane. She thanked the florist, a woman named Cecily, who was at table 9, and who I had called no fewer than 6 times on Petra's behalf. She thanked her photographer, her college roommate Sasha, who had flown in from Portland, and then Bex again, separately, for the bachelorette weekend, which I had planned, arranged, driven, and managed, and which Bex had attended as a guest. She thanked her mother-in-law for welcoming her. She thanked Callum's grandmother again, specifically, for the hand-embroidered handkerchief she had sent. She said, "And to everyone here tonight, every person in this room, thank you for making this the most beautiful night of my life." 7 minutes and 40 seconds. 112 guests. 0 mentions of Vivienne Ashworth. I sat at table 4 for a moment after the applause began. I looked at my champagne glass, real champagne, not Prosecco. Petra had been firm about that, and I had confirmed the order with the venue, and I thought about all the things I could do. I could smile. I could clap. I could refill my glass and finish the evening and call Odette tomorrow and add this to the long and detailed accounting of a dynamic I had been maintaining since I was 13 years old. I did not do any of those things. I set the champagne glass on the white linen tablecloth. I stood up. Callum's cousin Rosalind, who had been watching me during the toast with the slight alertness of someone following a current, looked at me. I said, clearly and without raising my voice, in a tone that carried to the 3 adjacent tables, "I have the receipts if anyone wants them." Then I walked out. I did not slam anything. I did not gesture. I took my clutch from the back of my chair, and I walked between the tables toward the lobby doors, and I pushed through them into the corridor, and behind me I could hear the room adjusting, the quality of silence that follows a sentence that has landed in a space that wasn't ready for it. Bex found me in the lobby 40 seconds later. She was still holding her champagne glass. She said, "Vivienne." I said, "I'm fine." She said, "What does that mean?" "The receipts." I said, "It means exactly what it sounds like." I sat down on a bench in the hotel corridor, cream-upholstered, gold legs, the kind of furniture that exists specifically to hold people having lobby conversations they didn't plan to have, and I breathed for a moment. The sounds of the reception came muffled through the doors. The applause had resumed. The evening was continuing. The world had not ended. Bex sat down next to me without asking and stayed there until I was ready to speak. Some decisions look quiet from the outside. Inside, they are the loudest thing you have ever done. The photographs were the first thing. I had left before the group photos that followed the toasts, which meant that my chair, table 4, center row, appeared empty in every image taken after 7:38 p.m. I know the exact time because the photographer, a meticulous man named Garrett whose work I had reviewed and recommended to Petra 8 months earlier, sent me a copy of the full gallery 3 weeks after the wedding, as he had been contracted to do for the immediate family. My chair was empty in 43 photographs. Petra called the next morning at 9:14 a.m. I was already awake. I had slept poorly, the way you sleep when something has happened that your body hasn't fully processed yet. Not insomnia exactly, more like a series of short clearings that kept returning me to the same room. Lobby corridor, cream bench, gold legs. Her voice on the phone was not the voice I expected. I had prepared myself for defensive, or for hurt, or for the particular register she had been using with me since childhood that communicated that my feelings were a form of inconvenience. What she sounded like was confused. What was that last night? She said. I said, I left early. You made a scene, Vivienne. I said one sentence. I said, at a normal volume. And then I left. If that's a scene, then I think we have different definitions. She was quiet. I could hear Callum somewhere in the background, the soft sounds of a hotel room morning, a coffee maker, a window being opened. You ruined my toast, she said. I had thought carefully about this moment. Not obsessively, not in a way that would have been productive to call preparation, but in the quiet way that you think about something when you have been carrying it for a long time. I had a few options in front of me. I could explain. I could apologize. I could escalate. I said, your toast named 7 people. I spent 14 months and $7,463.82 of my own money on your wedding. I'm not saying those are equivalent. I'm saying one of them was documented. There was a long pause. I know you did a lot, she said. I thought you knew I was grateful. I thought you might say so, I said. This is where the conversation could have gone several directions. Petra is not unintelligent. She has the capacity for honesty when she chooses to access it, and I could hear her, over the course of the next few minutes, trying to decide whether this was the moment to access it. It was like watching someone stand at the edge of something high and deciding whether to look down. She said, I didn't realize you were keeping track. And I said, very carefully, I wasn't keeping track. I was keeping records. Those are 2 different things. She didn't respond for a moment. Then she said, what do you mean, documented? I told her about Harlan Brooks' letter. I told her the total. I told her it was not a demand for payment, that I had never intended it as one, but that I had needed the accounting to exist. That I had needed someone outside the family to look at what I had given and say, yes, this is real, this has a number, this is not nothing. The silence that followed was different from the earlier ones. This one had weight in it. She said, you went to a lawyer. Yes, I said. Another silence. Then, without telling me, 6 weeks before your wedding, I said, because I understood something, even then, about what the toast was likely to be. This was the part one had not expected to say, and I want to be honest that I had not planned it. It came out because it was true. I had understood at some level, in that kitchen 6 weeks before the wedding when she had said you're so good at this stuff, what the toast was going to be. Not consciously, not as a prediction, but in the bone-deep way that a person who has been invisible for long enough begins to expect invisibility the way weather is expected, not with bitterness, just with accuracy. That's not fair, Petra said. I know, I said. A lot of things aren't. We talked for another 36 minutes. The conversation did not resolve anything, in the way that conversations that open something genuinely new rarely resolve anything in a single sitting. But it was honest in a way that conversations between us had not been in years, possibly ever. Petra cried toward the end. Not the crying of manipulation. I have known that register from her my entire life, but the crying of someone who has been told something true that they had successfully avoided hearing. My mother called 2 days later. She had heard from Petra. I'm not taking sides, my mother said, which is what she always said, which was its own form of side-taking. But you made a scene at her wedding, Vivienne. I said one sentence. I said again. And then I left. In front of 100 people. In front of 112 people, I said. Yes. There was a silence that I recognized as my mother recalibrating. She does this. She steps back from the specific argument and tries to locate the meta-argument, the one she can win. You've always had trouble letting things go, she said. I was sitting in my home office at the time, looking at the cedar box on the shelf. I let things go for 30 years, Mom, I said. This is what the other direction looks like. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, unexpectedly, was it really $7,000? $7,463.82, I said. Yes. Another silence. I didn't know, she said. I know you didn't, I said. And I meant it, and it was not an accusation, and I think she heard that. I didn't make sure you knew. That was also a choice I made for a long time that I'm reconsidering. We talked for another 20 minutes. My mother is not an easy woman, but She is not incapable of sitting with something uncomfortable once she understands she has no option but to sit with it. By the end of the call, she said, "I see you, Vivienne. I'm sorry it took this long." It was the most honest thing she had said to me in years. It was not enough. It was also not nothing. Odette came over that Saturday, the week after the wedding, and we sat on my balcony with 2 glasses of wine and the door to the city open behind us, and I told her everything that had happened since the lobby corridor. She listened the way she always listened, without redirecting, without solving. When I finished, she said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly.
Tired, I said.
But the kind of tired where you've put something down, not the kind where you're still carrying it. She nodded. We sat there for a while without talking. The city made its particular evening sounds, traffic and birds, and somewhere below, a child laughing. I had a glass of wine in my hand and nothing on my schedule the following morning, and no one's logistics to manage but my own. It felt very simply like my life. It has been 3 months since the wedding. Petra and I have spoken 4 times since that phone call. The conversations are careful in the way early conversations after something seismic are careful, like 2 people who have just moved heavy furniture and are not yet sure the floor is level. She has not mentioned the letter or the total. I have not raised it. We are, I think, in the long, slow process of renegotiating something that was never negotiated correctly in the first place. What I have learned in these 3 months, I want to say plainly, in case any part of it belongs to someone else. The first thing is, invisible labor does not stay invisible because no one sees it. It stays invisible because the person performing it keeps absorbing the cost of its erasure. The moment you name it, even softly, even in a lobby, even in a single sentence, it exists in the room differently. The second thing is, records are not resentment. I kept records because I needed my own life to be real to me, in a form that could not be revised by someone else's memory. That is not the same as a grudge. A ledger is not a weapon. It is a mirror. The third thing is, being the capable one is not the same as being the responsible one. Capability was assigned to me. Responsibility was also assigned by the same people, using the same reasoning. But assignments can be returned. It takes time. It is not a betrayal. The fourth thing, and this is the one I keep coming back to in the quiet evenings since, is this: some people love you best in the aggregate. In the general. To everyone. They mean it. They mean you in it. They simply do not know how to say your name specifically, because making you specific would make your cost visible, and making your cost visible would mean acknowledging what they owe. That is not cruelty. It is a wound that someone taught them very early, and they have been passing it down ever since. The fifth thing is the simplest. A seat at the table is not the same as being named. One is real. The other is courtesy. Know the difference. If someone has spent years making things run smoothly in your family, if they have been the one who handled it, whatever it was, when did you last say their name out loud, specifically in a room full of people who should know?